Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in this world. Welcome to this virtual conversation from the beautiful Nam June Paik Center, which is about 1 hour drive from Seoul. I'm extremely honored to be invited to speak and have a conversation with a museum director on this day, which is the 15-year anniversary of Nam June Paik passing away in 2006. You have to promise me that one day, when travel becomes easier, you have to visit this museum. I have to be honest, it's my favorite small museum in the world because of its architecture, because of its very brilliant staff, and of course, because it's about Nam June Paik, one of the most visionary people in modern cultural history. I think that Nam June Paik, as opposed to Marshall McLuhan, was the real visionary of 1960s, the person who is even better when McLuhan understood how big were the new changes due to new technologies. Today we celebrate Nam June Paik as a pioneering video artist, but he was not simply a video artist. He was a genius thinker, somebody who really understood what is going to happen in the 21st century. So I'm going to look at just a few sentences from his very interesting text, in fact a letter, which he wrote in the winter of 1966. He sent this letter to a few fellow technologists and artists. So this letter is from 1966. So we'll do something unusual, right? Instead of looking and discussing Nam June Paik video art, we're going to very closely look at just a few sentences from his text. Again, thinking about him today as a writer, as a thinker, as opposed to only a visual artist. So in this text, Nam June Paik proposes different kinds of technologies he would like to create to work with video signal. There are many ideas, but we're only going to focus on 2 points in this text. So already in the first paragraph of this letter, he mentions the word computer. And that's very important because often we think of Nam June Paik as an artist of analog video era, but in fact, he already understood revolutionary potential of a computer, even though he couldn't really use it at the time. So he talks about how in the 1960s, people have already applied computers to still images, creation of animation, creation of music, creation of literature, but not yet video. And he regrets that nobody thinks about how computer can also revolutionize working with video signal. So he talks about what he calls computerized video experiments, and he thinks that artists can bring unusual ideas and can help to create both new forms of art, but also new applications of technology, new types of technology. And in fact, this is exactly what happens, but much later, this only happens in the 1980s. For example, a relatively inexpensive computer called Amiga was introduced, and it was used in small television stations and by many artists. And this computer allowed kind of real-time computer processing of video signal. But again, this only happens about 20 years after Nam June Paik writes this letter. So in 1966, Nam June Paik points out that at that time, the information capacity of TV signal was much higher than what the computer was able to process. And he discusses this in numbers in the first sentence of this paragraph. In fact, he's trying to think of some solution how to slow down video signal, right, and how to make the speed of its information compatible with computer. So he proposes to record TV in a slow speed, even play it faster, so less information has to be processed by a computer. And again, I like the sentence because we can see that he thinks of a video not simply as an image, but he really thinks of video as a medium for carrying information. So he really thinks about media in terms of information theory, in terms of communication rates. Well, today, of course, the resolution of TV is much higher. In fact, in the mid-60s, we're talking about NTC or pulse signal. So that's approximately 500 or 700, right, lines, right? So 500 or 700, like, in fact, no, even less. Yeah, it's about 400 to 500, I think, lines of resolution. And today we have 4K and we already have 8K. So it's about right, 10 to 20 times higher. And I think what's interesting is that today computers, of course, are millions times faster, but they still struggle to keep up with the rate of video. So if you want to edit 4K video on your laptop, it can be challenging, and editing 8K video can be even more challenging. You maybe have to buy the latest laptop and spend lots of money. So this problem still exists. But now let us look at another paragraph in this amazing letter, because I read it yesterday. I never read this text before. It was sent to me by a museum, and I was so shocked because I realized that in 1966, Nam June Paik invented what I call cultural analytics. So as you know, in the 1960s, people started to really change what computer was. You have such new ideas as hypertext, and you also have developments which gradually lead towards graphical user interface. So the computer is becoming a media machine in the 1960s, very slowly. But there was not even any paint program. If you wanted to draw on a computer, that was not possible. I think the first paint program was created only in early 1970s. So computer couldn't really manipulate images. And here Nam June Paik really shows his absolutely visionary ability to see into the future, because he proposes that we can use computers to create visual catalogs of content of various TV programs or films. Of course, right, one can never be sure. I can never be sure that I've read all the relevant texts from the time, but I've been studying, media all my life as a media historian. I don't know anybody who had this idea like Nam June Paik in 1966 to use computer as a kind of machine for indexing TV and video. And here's what's amazing. So today we're in 2021, and every day we use search engines, such as, for example, Google or Naver, right? And the search engine index billions of pages, but we only index text. Now, we also started to index images about 10 years ago. So I can search billions of images by content, but we don't even try to index video yet. So Nam June Paik idea still hasn't been put in practice. So imagine that I want to go to YouTube, or maybe I want to go to Netflix, and I want to find particular scenes or particular shots in a movie which have particular content or particular cinematography or particular emotions. This doesn't exist. I mean, this system exists in laboratories, but not in our everyday life. So this is how visionary Nam June Paik was. What he talks about maybe will only happen 10 or 15 years from now. So now I want to make a jump and talk a bit about the present and how we as students, as teachers, as researchers can use kind of Paik ideas to study contemporary media. In 2007, I realized that by the time the computers were fast enough, and I can now start using computers to analyze and process media files, images, video, film, and so on. So in 2007, I was lucky to set up a research lab, which we call Cultural Analytics Lab. And the idea was to experiment with using computer tools as a way to analyze massive amounts of visual information. Thousands of films, millions of TV shows, billions of images. And to use techniques which have a direct relationship to the kind of techniques Nam June Paik was using in his art and also dreaming about in his texts. In the 1960s, Nam June Paik was very creative, but technologically he was limited, so he was only able to think about how to process, how to change, how to manipulate a single TV input, a single TV signal. As you know, in 1963, in his first exhibition, so he had 13 televisions, and each television was taking a live signal from a German TV broadcast, and then manipulating the signal to create something else. And in a way, it made sense because I just found out today while visiting a fantastic exhibition at this museum that in 1963 there was only one broadcasting station in Germany which was only broadcasting for 2 hours. So there was only one input to manipulate, to process, to play with. But today, we have 30 million, for example, we have 30 million YouTube channels which have at least 10 viewers. It's not one TV channel, but 30 million. We have millions of people who create documentaries, who upload videos about real life, who create artistic work. How can we possibly see this new universe of media content? And when I say see, I don't simply mean passively watching. What I mean is, for example, finding common patterns, finding videos which are most unique artistically in terms of content. For example, comparing videos done in different cities in Korea, a kind of seeing which is analytical, comparative, and leads to understanding of cultural trends and also unique artifacts. So in this text, Nam June Paik proposes to create a kind of visual index which will describe all the different shots in the movie or in a TV program. Even you can search these shots or scenes, right, by different criteria. So but how can we do it in relation to billions of hours of video content? So of course, we can start using techniques from artificial intelligence and a particular subfield of artificial intelligence called computer vision, and start, for example, breaking these videos into separate shots automatically, and then see if computer can understand the content of all the different shots. This is possible today. And I talk about these techniques in my book, but what I want to do now is to show you a different approach for analyzing video using diagrams and using data visualization. And you'll see that in spirit, what I do is in fact very similar to what Nam June Paik talks about, because I'm trying to take a video signal and compress it, right? But in a way which reveals interesting patterns, interesting things you may not even notice if you watch it at the normal speed. So I will show you just a few visualizations from a work I have done between 2010 and 2013 on creating visual representations of a few films by the famous revolutionary Russian film director Dziga Vertov, who was working in the 1920s. So these are different visualizations which appear in this essay. Lots of different experiments in trying to figure out how to reduce this film to a single image in a way which shows some very interesting information, very interesting things in this film. And I will just show you a few examples. But many of you probably have never seen Dziga Vertov films. They created 100 or 90 or 85 years ago. So first, we will look at maybe 90 seconds approximately from his most famous film, 1929, A Man Will Move the Camera, just to understand his cinematic language. And the reason I want to show you a bit of his film, in order for you to realize that we can't simply do what Nam June Paik wanted, because Nam June Paik wanted to make an index of different shots in terms of their content, behavior of actors, mood, but he doesn't talk about how to index film language, how to index movement, how to index rhythm, how to index visual energy in a film. What you're looking at may look to you that maybe it was speeded up, but that's actually normal film, right? So Vertov uses very fast editing to put more information to the film and to create very special effects for editing. So how do we index millions of films, not just in terms of their content, but in terms of its very artistic language, such as, for example, particular editing, which we see in this film. As some of you know, this film has multiple themes. One of them is filmmaking itself, and Vertov celebrates new possibilities of vision, new possibilities of seeing made possible by film technology. Just go a bit forward. This is 1929, right? Many decades before computer made possible this kind of editing. So he does it all inside camera. So Dziga Vertov was another visionary. So I will show you some among many more experiments I have done, trying to think about how we can use kind of graphical techniques, visualization techniques, to analyze films graphically. And in this case, I'm looking at a single film or two films. But my idea was to then be able to expand these techniques and do it automatically for millions of films. And my inspiration came in particular from this amazing diagram created by another revolutionary avant-garde Russian film director, Sergei Eisenstein. This is a diagram which appears in his article, which I think he wrote around 1940, where he diagrams first 2 minutes from his 1938 film, Alexander Nevsky. So that's a diagram of Eisenstein. This is another inspiration in the early 20th century, both in America and Russia. Scientists wanted to study work movements, to make work movements more efficient. So they invented a new type of photography. They would attach small lights to kind of parts of human body and then record this over time to visualize, for example, human movement. And then in 2000, it became possible to use computers to do the same thing. This method is now very common. It's called motion capture. It's used to produce video games. It was also used by a number of dance choreographers to create new artistic work by capturing dance movements using computer. So as you can see, I'm here bringing in a different tradition, not starting with content of, for example, TV program or film, but in fact using diagrams which we used in the 20th century by choreographers, by architects, by artists, is a way to capture other dimensions of artwork. So for example, here I created a visualization which shows approximately 1,000 feature films with dates ranging from the early 20th century to today. Each film represented as a point, and the vertical position of this point corresponds to how fast or how slow is the editing this film. So films which are very fast, like Dziga Vertov, appear at the bottom. In films which are very slow, appear on the top. So this gives us a kind of panoramic view on one aspect of film history. So when we can zoom in and, for example, look at the films of a particular director, or look at the films in a particular country. So here we took part of this data set, and we look at selected Russian films, and the films by Dziga Vertov, which are very fast, appear around here. So at the next step, we can, for example, zoom in further into this data, and now we can look at the editing pattern of a particular film. So here we see one part of the same film. I showed you a segment, a man with a camera, and each bar represents one shot, and the length of the bar represents how long this shot is. All right, so we can see that in some cases, each shot, shorter, longer, it's not clear what the relationship is, but in some cases we have a very structured kind of parts, and here I identified different types of editing in this film. Of course, we can visualize the same information in different ways. So here, instead of using bars, I'm using kind of circles, and we can see dramatically, the differences between some very short shots and some much longer shots. But here we still don't see the actual images. So the next step is perhaps zoom in more and see how we can reduce the whole film, which is maybe 1 hour or hour and a half or 2 hours, how we can reduce the whole film to one image, so we can compare all the different shots together. So we were using, assuming this was done 7-8 years ago, so we used the open source software, which automatically detects boundaries between different shots, and then extracts and saves one image from every shot. And then I wrote a very simple software, which will take these images and just put them in a kind of sequence, left to right, top to bottom. So here you see all the shots from this film, man with a camera. I think it's about 1,700 shots. I want to finish in a couple of minutes because what comes next is the most interesting part of this broadcast, which is the dialogue between me and the museum director. But let me just say literally a couple of things about this one visualization. You can study this, right? It's a different representation of a film. And I, for example, have all the films of Dziga Vertov, which were given to me by Film Archive. So potentially I can combine all these films into kind of mega film, and I can make index of all the different shots, right? So you can approach film study very creatively, the way Nam June Paik was manipulating TV signal. But what you can also do, among many other things, is you can do it by hand, you can use computer, you can further manipulate with images from a film to create kind of, let's say, even more different, even like more strange representations of this film. So here I took a different film of Vertov from 1928, and I used the software to automatically select all the shots, which are close up of a face, and when I put all those shots together, so we have like a new version of this film, which only shows you all the faces which appear in this movie. And we see how the shots form a kind of system. First of all, everybody looking up towards the new kind of communist future. And there is also sequence. First, we're looking in one direction, then looking in another direction. So there is a kind of structure to this, like you would have structure in a poem, or you would have structure in a piece of music. The shots are not random, we create a system. And of course, the next step will be to take all films of Dziga Vertov, all the films from 1920s, or all films in the history of cinema, and create these kind of representations. Even you can, for example, search all films by particular compositions or particular face expressions, but you can also study all films of one director like a system. So there are many other experiments in this essay. I will finish here. And there are many other ways to use computers to study moving images, film, TV, video games, especially today because of the rapid progress in artificial intelligence. So I will finish my remarks here. I hope I was able to make meaningful connection between 1920s, the work of people like Dziga Vertov, the 1960s, and the pioneering ideas of Nam June Paik, and our contemporary kind of media situation, the explosion of media today, how we can use the ideas of Nam June Paik is a way to study contemporary media and media history.
네. 네, 안녕하십니까. 저는 백남준아트센터 관장 김성은입니다. 오늘 굉장히 흥미로운 강연 해주신 레프 마노비치 교수님께 먼저 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 오늘 이 자리는 마노비치 교수님의 연구의 궤적에 속에서 백남준의 예술을 디지털 그리고 데이터라는 관점에서 조명해보고자 마련된 자리입니다. 흔히들 백남준 작가를 아날로그 미디어 아티스트다 이렇게 이제 생각들을 많이 하는데요. 사실 백남준 작가는 이미 1960년대, 70년대부터 정보 기술, 컴퓨터 기술, 또 네트워크 기술에 대해서 굉장히 그 동향을 기민하게 파악하고 또 탐구하고 또 그것을 작업과 예술과 연결시키면서 사회적 문화적인 그 영향에 대해서 깊이 사유했습니다. 네, 그래서 아까 마노비치 교수님께서 초반에 다뤄주신 백남준의 텍스트에 대해서 질문하신 분이 있었어요. 어떤 소수인가? 17년에 백남준 작가가 스톡홀름의 필킨 앤 블러틴이라는 잡지가 있었습니다. 그래서 그 잡지에 67년에 기고했던 글이고요. 그 글은 1974년에 백남준 작가의 개인전 도록이기도 한 미디어 앤 비디올로지라는 도록에 수록이 되어 있고요. 또 2019년에 MIT에서 출간된 We Are in Open Circuit, 우리는 열린 회로 안에 있다, Writings by Nam June Paik, 백남준의 글들을 모은 선집에도 수록이 되어 있고요. 우리말 번역은 백남준 아트센터에서 출간한 백남준 말에서 크리스토까지라는 책에도 수록이 되어 있습니다. 네, 백남준은 60년대부터 이처럼 컴퓨터 기술에 대해서 굉장히 깊은 관심을 가지고 실제로 컴퓨터 프로그래밍 작업을 하기도 했고요. 또 자신의 텔레비전 실험과 컴퓨터 기술의 전문기에 대해서 여러 가지 시도를 했고 또 조금 전에 말씀드린 것처럼 사유를 담은 텍스트도 꽤 여러 편의 텍스트를 작성하기도 했습니다. 또 뿐만 아니라 당시에 60년대 후반 당시로서는 굉장히 새로운 기술이었던 이런 컴퓨터 기술과 예술의 융합에 관련된 전시들에도 적극적으로 참여를 했었습니다. 그래서 예컨대 68년에 런던에서 열렸던 사이버네틱 세렌디피티, 70년에 뉴욕에서 열렸던 소프트웨어, 이런 전시에 백남준 작가의 작품이 참여하기도 하였습니다. 네, 저는 그래서 이제 백남준 작가가 디지털을 사유한 작가다라는 점에서 마노비치 교수님의 지금까지의 아주 중요한 미디어 연구, 뉴 미디어 영어에서부터 오늘 말씀해주신 문화 분석에 이르기까지 마노비치 교수님의 연구가 백남준의 미디어 아트에 대한 새로운 관점을 발견한다는 점에서 계속 저희에게 중요한 화두를 던져주고 계신다고 생각을 하고요. 이런 두 시각에서 몇 가지 이야기를 나눠보고자 합니다. 네, 저희 백남준 아트센터에서 매년 내고 있는 학술지가 있습니다. NJP 리더라는 학술지에 참관 후에 우리 마노비치 교수님께서 이제 글을 기고해 주셨는데요. 이제 그 글의 제목이 그저 소프트웨어만이 존재한다라는 제목의 글이었습니다. 이 글 안에 그런 대목이 나옵니다. 사실 디지털 매체라고 우리가 말할 때 그 매체의 속성은 그 매체 자체에서 오는 것이 아니라 그 매체가 사용되고 활용되고 또 다른 방향으로 개발되기 위해서 들어오는 여러 가지 사회적, 경제적, 문화적인 힘에 의해서 그 매체의 특성이 정해지는 것이다. 이제 그렇게 쓰신 대목을 굉장히 제가 인상 깊게 보았는데요. 마노비치 교수님이 보실 때 이 백남준 작가가 이 글에서 말씀하신 그런 측면을 비추었을 때 단순히 아날로그냐 디지털이냐 그런 미디어의 구분이 중요한 것이 아니라 미디어, 매체 자체의 어떻게 보면 존재론적인 그런 측면을 탐구한 미디어 아티스트로서 어떻게 이 백남준 작가를 보고 계시는지 그런 부분에 대해서 좀 들어보고 싶습니다.
When I think of somebody like Nam June Paik, I don't only think of his artworks, which I saw, which survived. For me, he's a thinker, he's visionary, and I think that all his ideas, regardless of whether these ideas were realized or not, are equally important. So I don't want to judge him by whatever limited things he was able to do using limited technology of his time. I think it's a mistake to only look at what he did as opposed to what he wanted to do. But having said that, I also want to say that I deeply admire, respect, and support the work of wonderful people, such as all the people in this museum, who dedicate years of their life to archiving, preserving, and studying the surviving, the realized art of Nam June Paik. That's also very important. As far as the dimension of analog and digital, it's very important. In fact, we can say that 20th century was mostly analog, and so far 21st century is digital. But of course, this transition already starts very, very slowly in the 1960s, and only really kind of get realized in the 1990s. So the whole second part of 20th century, it's about very gradual, very slow, invisible at first transition from analog to digital. And we have, very interesting figures at the time. So think about Nam June Paik, who was an inventor of technologies, a writer of ideas. In his writing, he also proposed many commercial ideas, but he also operated within the galleries, but also non-profit TV channels. So he was able to use lots of different resources and lots of different formats, to operate. And just to keep my comments short, I want to say that I'm so lucky that today I was able to spend time in the museum and saw a fantastic exhibition that has about Nam June Paik, because first of all, it has a working models of his TV synthesizer and other technology from 1960s, but it also places his art within a broad context of the history of broadcasting from 1930s until today. So museum is doing great work in contextualizing his art.
그러면 제가 좀 이어서 아까 마노비치 교수님께서 다뤄주신 백남준의 텍스트에 대해서 잠깐만 좀 다시 말씀을 드려보고 싶은 것이 그 글의 첫머리가 이제 이렇게 시작합니다. 이제 백남준 작가가 이제 글을 쓴 당시에 그 컴퓨팅 리뷰라는 그 저널에 60년부터 66년까지를 이제 쭉 훑어 본 것 같습니다. 그래서 컴퓨팅 리뷰에 실린 1만 편에 달하는 에세이 가운데 시각예술을 주제로 다룬 것이 극히 드물다라는 문장으로 이제 이 글이 시작됩니다. 그래서 이제 백남준 작가는 제가 생각했을 때 백남준 작가는 늘 그 시대의 어떤 기술적인 동향이든 사회적인 동향이든 그 시대를 정확하게 진단하고 또 그 안에서 새로운 예술적 가능성을 어디에서 찾을 수 있을 것인가 늘 작업의 출발이 그랬던 것으로 저는 보고 있습니다. 네, 아까 마노비치 교수님께서 이 글에서 아주 흥미롭게 주목하신 부분이 이제 백남준 작가가 컴퓨팅 기술을 이용을 해서 비디오 이미지를 카탈로깅하고 인덱싱할 수 있는 가능성에 대해서 이제 언급한 부분을 이제 주목을 해주셨는데요. 이제 그 관점에서 사실 제가 이제 느꼈던 것은 백남준 작가가 그 글에서 제안하고 있는 여러 가지 가능성, 그러니까 컴퓨터 기술을 예술에 접목하고 또 그 예술과 접목된 컴퓨터 기술이 또 다른 예술이 아닌 다른 사회적 분야에까지 영향을 미칠 수 있다. 이렇게 본 것은 이 백남준이 이미 그때 그 당시에 이미 그 데이터로 대상을 바라보는 그런 관점을 가지고 있었기 때문이 아닐까 그런 생각이 들었습니다. 네, 그러면서 그 마노비치 교수님의 그 Cultural Analytics 그 책의 서론에 이제 교수님께서 그 자신의 연구 궤적이 미디어 중심의 분석에서 데이터 중심의 분석으로 그 이동한 것에 대해서 설명해 주신 대목도 떠올랐고요. 그런 좀 지점들을 저희 이제 백남준 아트센터의 어떤 과업 중에 하나인 그 백남준 비디오 아카이브에 대한 좀 내용으로 한번 마노비치 교수님께 질문을 드려보고 싶습니다. 네, 그 백남준 아트센터는 그 세계 유일의 백남준 비디오 아카이브를 가지고 있고요. 그 비디오 아카이브 안에 약 2,300여 점의 비디오 테이프를 소장을 하고 있습니다. 백남준 작가의 주요작이라고 할 수 있는 많은 작품들이 여러 다양한 편집 버전으로 소장되어 있고요. 그 저희가 2011년부터 이 소장 비디오 아카이브의 어떤 연구 토대를 구축하고 좀 학술적 가치를 높이기 위해서 그 비디오 아카이브 분석 프로젝트를 하고 있습니다. 네, 아까 마노비치 교수님께서 그 이제 강연에서 여러 가지 그 비주얼라이제이션, 그 다양한 그 영화 속에 다양한 요소들을 시각화하고 이것을 데이터화하는 것에 대해서 설명을 해주셨는데요. 저희가 하는 비디오 분석도, 비디오 아카이브의 분석도 좀 유사한 그 방향성을 가지고 있습니다. 그 백남준 그 비디오에 담긴 모든 것, 그러니까 그것은 뭐 이미지이기도 하면서 사운드이기도 하면서 그 안에 들어간 여러 가지 편집 기법, 합성 기법 등등을 저희가 이제 시퀀스별로 분석하는 그런 연구 프로젝트입니다. 네, 그래서 제가 이제 교수님께 좀 여쭤보고 싶은 것이 물론 그 교수님이 다루시는 굉장히 방대한 그 빅데이터, 문화 분야의 빅데이터에 비하자면 그렇게 아주 방대한 양은 아닐 수 있겠지만 그래도 저희가 가지고 있는 그 2,000여 점이 넘는 아날로그 테이프 안에 담긴 이 백남준의 비디오를 어떻게 데이터화하는 것이 그것을 유의미한 자원으로 만들 수 있고 또 그 안에서 어떤 기술적 왜냐하면 이 아날로그 테이프를 디지털 포맷으로 변환하는 문제들도 함께 생각을 해야 되기 때문이겠죠. 그래서 여러 가지 기술적인 방법들 혹은 이에 대한 예술적, 문화적, 사회적 이런 어떤 관점들이 이 안에 담긴 것들을 분석할 때 데이터로서 분석할 때 어떤 점들을 좀 우리가 기묘하게 생각해야 될지 혹시 제안해 주실 수 있다면 그에 대한 견해를 좀 들어보고 싶습니다.
But how to so technically, this is already, been, that's already standard. I mean, many broadcast and film museums have been doing it for close to 10 years. We index everything. I mean, it's very easy to do using artificial intelligence. I mean, all these problems have solved. So I don't think you need to ask me because you can ask any technician. But how to index artistic work, that's actually interesting theoretical question. But I think, once you digitize, or if you already digitize, some kind of part of your archive, then I think the next step, right, is there are two ways to do it, right? One way is to immediately apply AI technology and to automatically index, different shots, content, and so on. But a different way, and that's how I would do it, is to first try to kind of visualize, this data set, because the computer may miss many interesting things. Yeah, so I would use like various techniques of what I call media visualization for exploratory data analysis, and you don't need any supercomputers, right? This today can be all done. I mean, we can basically analyze and visualize the whole archive on one laptop. And then the last thing I would say, it's the same process which I used in 2002, 2005 when I was working on soft cinema. I developed these ideas of how you index a data set of videos. But indexing, but it's a kind of interactive process. Yeah. So basically, you maybe manually tag, right? You apply some tags, even see the kind of sequences, right? The kind of affinities it creates. Even you try other ones. So it's a kind of interactive process of superimposing, right, a new map of meanings, right, onto the archive when seeing what comes out and then going back, right? So as opposed to a very mechanical process.
네, 사실 아까 채팅창에 비슷한 질문을 해주신 분이 있었습니다. 아까 프레젠테이션에서 범주화라고 해야 될까요? 어떤 범주, 어떤 크라이테리아라고 할 수가 있겠죠. 그 영상을 분석할 때 단순히 인물이냐, 사물이냐, 혹은 동작이냐, 정지냐, 이런 단순한 차원이 아니라 우리가 이 어떤 아주 섬세하면서도 복잡한 이런 범주들을 우선 만들어야 분석을 할 수 있을 텐데, 아까 보여주신 이제 영상 분석에 나오는 인체의 움직임이라든가 그 안에서 표현되는 감정들 뿐만 아니라 이제 질문해 주신 분은 사운드와 소리와 이미지가 합해져 있는 이제 그런 장면들을 분석할 때 어떻게 범주의 체계를 잡을 수 있을 것인가, 이제 그에 대한 생각을 조금 더 들어보고 싶다, 마노비치 교수님께 들어보고 싶다, 이제 그런 질문을 남겨주신 분이 계셨습니다.
Well, so I think the main challenge, I think, in indexing any kind of media archive, regardless of whether you do it by computer or by hand, is how do you capture not only the level of elements, but the larger level of larger structures. And I call this the challenge of Gestalt. Right? So you watch a video, you feel energy, you feel movement, you get a particular sense of how things are combined. I don't know if it's possible to capture it if you only describe elements. I think I would love to collaborate with you. Let's just take a couple of videotapes and try it. So we don't have to do lots of data. And what I would like to try is to describe on different levels, like 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 1 minute, right? So describe at a different level of zoom, because I think we'll see certain structures in Nam June Paik work on a larger level, which are not reducible to if you only describe things on a kind of second by second level. And I think this applies to movies as well. I mean, I think this is what people do informally, right? When we do film analysis or when we teach film in schools, but it all happens very informally. But with Nam June Paik, right? His video very digital to the extent that he has a very dense structure, right? Of separate elements. So it actually makes sense, I think, to do very complete description of all the elements. And then you can also put these elements in new combinations. So I get so many ideas just thinking about it.
네, 이 이야기를 이제 조금 더 좀 넓혀서 지금 우리가 살고 있는 온라인 환경, 디지털 환경에 대해서 좀 말씀을 들어보고 싶습니다. 이제 많은 기관들이 그러하겠지만 이제 저희도 온라인상에서 여러 가지 액티비티를 하고 있고 기본적으로 웹사이트를 열고 있고요. 그래서 저희도 이제 매달 구글 애널리틱스 정보를 저희가 이제 받고 있습니다. 그래서 이 백남준 아트센터 홈페이지에 누가 얼마나 어떻게 저희 홈페이지를 이용을 하는지, 이용자들의 접속자 기기라든가 사이트 유입 경로라든가 페이지 뷰 수라든가 평균 머무는 시간 혹은 이탈률, 이런 각종 데이터들을 이제 저희가 받아서 우리의 활동들이 온라인에서 어떻게 받아들여지고 어떻게 향유가 되고 있는가를 늘 분석을 하게 됩니다. 그러다 보니까 미술관에서 결정해야 되는 많은 부분들이 이런 데이터에 의존하게 되는 것 같습니다. 그리고 이제 그 코로나 팬데믹의 시대가 이제 되면서 이 온라인에서의 미술관의 활동, 예술의 활동이 그 어느 때보다 중요해진 것 같은데요. 이제 그러다 보니까 저희 같은 미술관도 그 수많은 온라인 플랫폼들 중에 하나가 되어가는 건 아닐까 이제 그런 생각도 듭니다. 이제 뿐만 아니라 이런 디지털 온라인 환경에서는 미술관에서 소장하고 있는 예술 작품, 그리고 대중예술의 콘텐츠, 나아가서는 개인들이 만들어내는 다양한 영상과 시각 이미지들이 모두 어떻게 보면 같은 프로토콜로 생산이 되고 향유가 되고 있습니다. 네, 그래서 이제 모든 것이 정말 그 비트, 바이트, 이렇게 정보로서 존재하는, 데이터로서 존재하는 환경이라고 이미 그런 환경에 저희가 살고 있게 된 지는 오래지만 특히 이제 이 팬데믹의 환경에서는 그런 부분들을 더 굉장히 깊게 깨닫게 됐는데요. 이제 그렇다면 그 사실 이러한 환경에서 사실 예술이란 무엇인가 이제 그런 이제 질문을 던질 수밖에 없는 것 같습니다. 이 백남준 작가도 이미 1970년에 이제 우리가 정보가 넘치는 시대에 살고 있다는 것을 좀 더 강하게 의식을 해야 된다. 그래서 앞으로는 정보를 기록하고 보관하는 것보다 정보를 검색하고 찾아내는 것, 이제 그것이 더 복잡하고 어려워질 것이다. 이제 이렇게 말한 바 있고요. 또한 정보 기술이 발전함에 따라서 정보의 왜곡 기술도 같은 리듬으로 변화했다라고 쓴 바 있습니다. 네, 그래서 이제 제가 마노비치 교수님께 좀 들어보고 싶은 말씀은 이렇게 이제 모든 것이 데이터로 만들어지고 데이터로 향유되고 데이터로 인식되는 이제 이런 세계에서 예술은 무엇이라고 생각하시는지 뭐 다소 큰 질문이라고 할 수 있겠지만 예술은 어떻게 다룰 수 있고 또 어떻게 어떤 역할을 해야 될 것인지 지금 같은 특히 이 2021년 지금 이 시점에 여러 가지 그 환경을 생각을 했을 때 어떤 것이 예술이어야 할 것인지를 그 교수님의 연구에 비춰서 한 말씀 해주시면 좋을 것 같고요. 그 지금 마노비치 교수님께서 그 채팅으로 열심히 그 또 질의응답을 해주고 계시는데요. 이 질문 중에 또 그런 질문이 올라왔습니다. 그 지금 제가 조금 전에 드린 질문에 좀 이어서 말씀드릴 수 있을 것 같은데요. 그 예술가의 실험성이라든가 또 혹은 지금 질문자께서 말씀하신 것처럼 그 예술가가 발휘하는 어떤 즉흥성, 백남준의 비디오 작품에 담긴 상당 부분이 어떤 즉흥적인 요소, 우연적인 요소들이 많이 들어가 있는데 이제 이런 부분들을 어떻게 데이터로서 우리가 좀 사유할 수 있을 것인가 그에 대해서 좀 전반적으로 말씀을 해주시면 좋을 것 같습니다.
So what should I tell you about art? Should I be, very conventional? Should I be very controversial? That's a good question. I think the problem with lots of so-called art today is that people who go to art school get no systematic education in anything. So we're basically ignorant. Nam June Paik studied classical music. She also studied aesthetics and philosophy of art. And I think that this is what gave 20th century avant-garde such energy, is this artist had a classical art and humanities education, and then were able to revolt against this education. So there was this energy of resistance. But today, you go to art school, you study contemporary art, you study what people do, and when you do the same, so you get a kind of feedback. So you can never get outside of the system. I like art, I'm an artist, but I hate contemporary art world. and I hope one day it will change dramatically. How and when, I don't know. When Nam June Paik was creating his art and writing his ideas, he and his other friends were living in Soho, which is a very small part of New York, and probably it was only a few dozen people who knew each other. So it was a tiny, tiny community of people. So today there are hundreds of thousands of artists, millions of art students, hundreds of art biennials and so on. Artists don't spend time in their studios, they travel. So it's a very different situation. So maybe the world has become too connected, too global, too mobile, and maybe we need to go back to some kind of form of discontinuity. Anyway, what is art? Do we need art? Maybe we don't need art anymore. Maybe we should close our art schools. These are all very interesting, important questions, but I don't think we can solve them very quickly. So let's go to the next one.
네. 마지막에 제가 드렸던 질문은 오늘이 사실은 백남준 추모 주간, 백남준 추모 15주기를 맞이하는 주간입니다. 그래서 백남준 작가의 미디어 아트라는 작업 세계, 그리고 백남준 작가가 썼던 그 수많은 사유의 흔적들, 이제 그런 것들을 좀 새로운 관점에서 바라볼 수 있게 마노비치 교수님께서 굉장히 중요한 주제들을 던져 주신 것 같고, 그 주제들을 깨어가다 보면 아마도 지금 우리가 살고 있는 정말 미디어를 가지고 사는 것이 아니라 미디어 속에서 살고 있는 오늘날 우리 삶을 좀 다시 돌아볼 수 있게 하는 그런 예술의 필요성, 그런 것들을 좀 다 같이 생각해 볼 수 있는 시간이었으면 좋겠다. 그런 뜻에서 좀 커다란 질문을 드려보았습니다. 네, 오늘 저희 이제 약속된 시간이 다 되어서 오늘 프로그램을 마무리해야 될 것 같은데요. 오늘 마노비치 교수님께서 백남준 아트센터에 오셔서 오후 내내 전시도 보시고 저희와 많은 이야기를 나누셨습니다. 마지막으로 좀 덧붙이고 싶은 얘기 있으시면 해주시면 좋겠습니다.
Well, I want to thank wonderful staff of the Nam June Paik Art Center and also freelance people who came to help with beautiful broadcast. It's so special to be in a museum after this very unusual year. Museums is the best spaces we have. You don't have to be artists. You don't have to like art. There is so much beautiful design today. There are beautiful coffee shops. There's beautiful music by Blackpink and BTS. There's beautiful Instagrams. Art is just one among many, many inputs and outputs. So in fact, I don't want to become artist. The world doesn't need more artists. The world needs more people who go to art museums and learn about the past, such as Nam June Paik Museum. So don't be artists, but be an art museum goer. That's my wish for you.
오늘 마노비치 교수님의 토크 그리고 같이 나눴던 대담은 저희가 자막을 달아서 저희 백남준 아트센터 유튜브 채널에 올려드리도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 혹시 일부만 보신 분들, 오늘 보지 못하신 분들은 나중에 그 영상 한번 보시고 계속 이 이야기들을 여러 가지 방식으로 백남준 아트센터와 마노비치 교수님과 그리고 청중 여러분 계속 이어갔으면 좋겠습니다. 네, 오늘 좋은 자리 만들어주신 레프 마노비치 교수님께 다시 한번 감사드리고요. 통역에 애써주신 통역사 선생님께도 감사의 말씀 전합니다. 네, 그러면 마치도록 하겠습니다. 같이 해주셔서 감사합니다.
감사합니다.